Besides being the chair of ABSA, she's also the Chief Operating Officer of Tourvest Holdings and also the Secretary General of the Black Business Council. So thank you again, Judy. So hello, everyone, and welcome. Good morning to those of you in South Africa and good evening to those of you joining us from Australia. Particularly wish to welcome all of our ABSA members and also members of the Australia-Africa Chamber of Commerce based in Australia, including the Chair, Duncan Harris, who's with us today. And I'd like to acknowledge our newly arrived Austrade Commissioner, Scott Morris, who just started his job in Joburg yesterday. So welcome, Scott. Just to set the scene, I'd just like to say a few words about Australia's economic relationship with South Africa. We share a really substantial bilateral trade and investment relationship. South Africa is our largest trading partner in Africa by far. About a third of Australia's trade with Africa, all of the African countries combined, is with South Africa. And two-way trade in goods and services was valued at almost 4 billion Australian dollars last year. The bilateral investment relationship is particularly strong and broad. It's doubled since 2012 to over $14 billion Australian last year. And it ranks above actually many of our Asian trading partners. Australia was the 7th largest foreign country investor in South Africa in 2016, and we're the largest investor in South Africa's mining sector and the second largest in your global business processing sector. And the investments, while concentrated in the mining area, are also, Australian firms have made very significant investments in real estate, banking, insurance, retail, and the energy sectors. So the discussion today covers two issues which are really of very strong interest to Australian businesses operating here in South Africa and also to potential investors. Firstly, South Africa's Black economic empowerment policies, which aim to achieve a just transition and economic transformation. And secondly, South Africa's investment environment. And we're really fortunate to hear from two expert speakers, B-BBEE Commissioner Ms. Zodwa Ntuli and Invest South Africa Head Mr. Yunus Hoosen. So I want to really warmly thank our two eminent speakers today. So over to you, Judy. I really look forward to hearing what I'm sure is going to be a very informative discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and thank you for setting the scene so eloquently. Our commissioner is based in Pretoria, for those of you who know South Africa, and it is our Canberra here in South Africa. So we will suspend, you will notice as this hour proceeds that many protocols will be suspended. No reading of CVs, simply because we believe that we should maximize the 1 hour that we have with our two expert leaders in the field of broad-based Black economic empowerment. And to kick off, I just want to make two comments around BEE and transformation because they are inextricably linked. It is about, in essence, creating a new value system and restructuring the socio-economic order in South Africa. And whether we want to talk about the past or not, it is imperative that we understand that B-BBEE is about the elimination of apartheid-caused disparities and the deracialization of our economy. It is both an instrument and a measure of change. So may I now call on Ms. Zodwa Ntuli, our Commissioner at the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Commission. A warm, warm welcome to you, Commissioner. And I know you're very busy, so we are humbled and delighted to introduce you today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just testing if you can all hear me. All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to engage today with the chamber. I'm really glad to actually be engaging at this point in time. I think it is important for us to engage more regularly around the regulatory environment in South Africa, so that we can always be on the same page in terms of what is it that investors can look forward to, but what is it also that they would be required to adhere to. And I think the one thing that is also very important about engaging on these platforms is particularly because there could be a lot of misinformation that is not desirable, that can either inhibit investment in the country or even, portray the country for what it is not. So it is important that we lay the foundation for what exactly the requirements are, why are we doing this, where are we going with it, and how are we doing. So it is important for us, therefore, to start from where this is starting from. Why are we having a B-BBEE legislation? As I go through the presentation, I will, sorry, Judy, if I may just check, did you get the presentation?
Fabienne, yes, there we have it, Commissioner.
Okay, no, thank you very much. I just wanted to say that you can feel free to also circulate it. I will not go through each and every slide of it, but feel free to circulate it to your members.
Thank you.
Thank you. As Judy has already indicated, it is a constitutional imperative in South Africa for us to drive economic transformation. And the purpose for which we're doing this is to ensure that the South African economy is inclusive, based on the history of South Africa, where a majority of South Africans were excluded from the mainstream economy, and they were particularly excluded from all critical aspects of the economy, including skills development, as well as management and participation in the enterprises in South Africa. So now, based on that, the Constitution demands of us that we create an environment which is inclusive. And as a result, our Constitution is very clear and provides the right to equality to everyone in South Africa, but goes on further to allow the government to introduce legislative and other measures to ensure that May we just request that people mute?
Yes, Ms. Zodwa, I've turned them off. We are requesting to mute.
All right, thank you very much. My apologies, I just got distracted there. Yes, so it is a fundamental constitutional imperative. As I've indicated, our Section 9 guarantees everyone in South Africa a right to equality. However, for us to achieve the right to equality, it is important that we take into account and implement specific measures that are going to bring about the inclusion of those that were previously excluded from the economy. And further to that, our Constitution also enables government to implement measures for preferential procurement to ensure that the previously disadvantaged enterprises and entrepreneurs are able to get preference in terms of goods and services that are procured by government. So this is a constitutional imperative. It is supported by the supreme law of the country. So now, if you look at the framework in South Africa, if you ask yourself as an investor and you're outside South Africa and those that are already inside South Africa, what governs the broad-based Black economic empowerment in South Africa? We've got what we call the B-BBEE Act, and the B-BBEE Act basically includes the codes of good practice. It includes the regulations that are gazetted or that may be gazetted by the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition from time to time. And the minister may also issue notices that are consistent with the Act from time to time to clarify any aspect of the legislation that may be necessary to clarify. And from time to time, the minister does so. But the legislation also establishes the B-BBEE Commission, which is a regulatory entity that is tasked with overseeing the proper implementation of B-BBEE. Fundamental to this mandate of the B-BBEE Commission is to educate and raise awareness in an effort to ensure that everybody that does business in this country understands what is required, and also that it offers to assist those that are struggling with understanding the requirements. So at all times, the B-BBEE Commission is available to ensure that every person that operates in South Africa can be in a position to implement the B-BBEE Commission, the B-BBEE Act, in a manner that will help the country to achieve the economic objectives and the transformation objectives that are set in the legislation. Just to remind everyone in terms of what we mean by broad-based Black economic empowerment in South Africa. The broad-based economic empowerment in South Africa means basically the empowerment of all Black people, in particular women, workers, youth, and people with disabilities, as well as those people that are in rural areas. And it is through a various a number of strategies that are integrated that are designed to achieve that kind of economic transformation. It is for this reason that you'll find that outside the B-BBEE Act itself as a legislation that is directly focused on empowering Black people, there are other related pieces of legislation like the Employment Equity Act, which is designed to transform the workplaces, as well as the other related legislation around redistribution of land and so forth. So it is integrated means, and you'll find also that government has introduced various support mechanisms like funding that is designed specifically to ensure that Black entrepreneurs get the funding to participate meaningfully in the economy. So I would like to just set that scene in terms of the framework, that it is governed by the B-BBEE legislation, and then that the codes basically break down in terms of what is it that will measure you on as an entity that operates in South Africa. And if we go into the next slide, you will see that these are the sections that I would like you to just take into account at all times when you do your own assessment of what you need to comply with. But I think mainly it is important to note that every entity that does business in South Africa, for as long as that business involves the economic activity with a government of South Africa, or any entity that does business with the government of South Africa, it is important to note that in terms of the codes of good practice, that particular entity will be considered to be a measured entity, and as a result, it will be required, therefore, to comply with the requirements in terms of the B-BBEE Act. That means that you'll be required to be measured as well under the codes of good practice. And as I've indicated, I think I indicated earlier, that there are 11 codes of good practice that have been issued and gazetted by the minister. Those are the generic codes and the various codes that I will show you on the slide later in respect of various sectors of the industry. So the minister is empowered to issue specific codes for specific sectors based on the dynamics that particular sector may be having, and that actually warrants a separate or a distinct sector code from the generic codes. So it is important that we always keep in mind that, because if you are operating in a sector like, for instance, the ICT sector, you will be required to apply the ICT sector code. You cannot opt to apply any other code other than that one. So it is important that everyone that comes to South Africa familiarize themselves with that. But I think what is also important to note is that there are no exemptions towards the application of B-BBEE Act in South Africa for any measured entity. So the legislation doesn't provide for any exemptions or any deviations. But what it does, it provides for government to be in a position to request such exemptions and deviations for a specific type of activity and for reasons that can be justifiable. And that process should be done by approaching the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition for that particular organ of state or public entity to obtain such an exemption. You'll note that in recent times, the minister has issued and gazetted 2 exemptions and deviations, which related to the Tourism Equity Fund, as well as the Department of Minerals and Energy. So that allows for government to be flexible in instances where there is a need to either exceed the requirements in the codes or to deviate from the requirements that have been set in the codes. So it is important that we then keep in mind some of these sections. The last section that I also just want you to keep in mind is the reporting requirements, that if you're an entity that operates in South Africa and you are JSE listed, you will be required to report on an annual basis to the B-BBEE Commission. But also, if you are an entity that operates in a sector that has got a sector code, you are required to report on an annual basis to your sector council that was established in terms of that particular sector code. In terms of the next slide, I think what I thought would be also important for us to reflect on today is the elements that are being measured. I'm not going to touch fully on each one of them, but just to give you a sense of the 5 areas that are being measured in South Africa. The reason that there are 5 areas, the 5 key areas, is because these are drawn from exactly what the country sought to address and where the problems were. We spoke about the issues around the exclusion of the majority of South Africans from the mainstream economy. That includes in relation to ownership, in relation to management control of the various enterprises in South Africa, but also in terms of skills development, where Black people were excluded, especially from the critical skills that are required in various important sectors of the economy, as well as enterprise development, enterprise and supply development, which recognizes the fact that the value chains in South Africa are still very entrenched. There's still high barriers to entry. And if there is no conscious mechanism that is implemented to facilitate the opening up of these value chains, as well as to transform them, it will not be possible for Black people to enter and be sustainable in the economy. The last one is the socio-economic development, which relates to every income generating initiative that the measured entity can implement other than the ones that have been already identified. And which are going to enable a Black person who was previously disadvantaged to be in a position to participate meaningfully in the economy. So those are the 5 key areas. And you'll see that in the other sectors, like the financial sector codes, would require the measured entities in that sector to also contribute towards consumer education, which is one thing that they deemed to be a priority or something that is of importance for that sector, especially given the levels of financial literacy in South Africa. So now, if you look at all of these elements, there are 3 priority elements, which is ownership, skills development, and enterprise and supply development. But it is important for every entity that operates in South Africa to understand that all of these 5 elements are key and important, and they must implement initiatives to work towards achieving what is intended in there. And failure to achieve these particular priority elements will result in an entity being discounted by a level down in terms of its scorecard. So there is a scorecard that is then used to measure. It is a balanced scorecard. And I think it is important again to reflect at this point that the B-BBEE legislation in South Africa provides a flexible mechanism which allows for a balanced scorecard, but also allows the entities to pace themselves in terms of how they would like to achieve towards the various elements that have been set and the targets that have been set. And also what is important is that the legislation also allows for those entities that are smaller, entities that are at 10 million and below, to be exempted from a verification process in order to reduce the cost of doing business for their side. But also over and above that, we provide free advice to all of the entities so that there is no entity that should find compliance with B-BBEE to be more onerous to itself, because we provide free advice and we are available to assist each and every entity that operates in South Africa to be able to understand and implement the legislation. So the one part that is important about the elements is that as I go through them, I'll just highlight the most important things that are important to reflect on or to remember. In terms of ownership, if you could go to the next slide. If you go to ownership, you will find that in terms of ownership, what is important is that there is a target, a minimum target that has been set, and that is 25% plus 1 in terms of ownership. That means that entities that operate in South Africa should ensure that they do have 25% plus 1 in the hands of Black people. And how do we measure this? It is important to also make sure that the equity stake that is allocated can be corresponding or should correspond with the exercisable voting rights, the economic interest, as well as the net value realization. What is key here is that net value realization is important because at the end of the day, what is important is that that equity that has been afforded needs to be given to that entity must ultimately vest in the hands of Black people to ensure that we're able to deracialize the economy, but as well as able to change the ownership patterns in South Africa. So now, if you look at the ownership element, entities such as the not-profit organizations, NGOs, as well as organs of state and public entities are normally measured using a specialized scorecard because they are not able to contribute to ownership. So a specialized scorecard is used for that. The only time that an NPC or an NPO or an NGO can be able to be used for ownership is when it houses a broad-based scheme, such as a BPOS, an employee share ownership scheme, or any similar collective scheme of that nature. It is only then that it can be recognized, but then even then, it must meet the requirements that are set in the codes of good practice for that particular scheme, whether it's an ESOP or whether it's a BPO. So the one thing that continues to be a challenge around ownership is the fronting practices that we find, and also the schemes that are designed in a sophisticated manner to circumvent the legislation or present the picture that is not a true reflection of what ownership looks like. Now, if you look at that, looking at ownership and the requirements thereof, for entities that are multinationals, that are foreign entities that are operating in South Africa, there is an alternative to the ownership initiative. So where multinationals are not able to get into an ownership transaction, they are allowed to then apply to the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition to do what we call an equity equivalent investment program. This basically means that in lieu of ownership, you are allowed to make a contribution towards other elements such as enterprise development, skills, as well as research and development. And this is a process that is administered by the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. And there's a team of people there in the BEE unit as well, who are there to assist all the people that want to come into the country, or those that wish to initiate an equity equivalent investment program to be able to do so within a particular period of time that they will be able to assist them until they get to a point where they meet the requirements for the minister to approve it. There are a number of equity equivalent programs that have already been approved, and I think entities could also learn from those in terms of just understanding how they have been implemented, and where some of them have not been successful, then they can then be in a position to improve on that. In terms of the requirements, a multinational can contribute about 25% of the business value of its operations in South Africa, or it can contribute 4% of the total revenue of its operations in South Africa. So it is important to note that as a multinational, you're not compelled to get into an equity equivalent deal. However, the main requirement that a number of multinationals are struggling with is the requirement that such an entity must have the global policy that prevents it from entering into your traditional equity or share type transactions. And in that case, a number of entities have done transactions in other jurisdictions, and sometimes therefore it becomes very difficult for them to meet the requirements that are set in the equity equivalent program, because of the fact that if they've been able to do equity deals in other jurisdictions, there shouldn't be a reason for them to do a deal in South Africa. However, for those that legitimately have a policy that prevents them from doing that, the legislation does provide for a mechanism. So it is important that we know that. And now, if you look at the next element, which is management control, links directly to the ownership element. Management control, though, talks about the representation of Black people on the decision-making structures of companies. Basically, this is intended to ensure that Black people do manage and control existing as well as new enterprises. So it might be that the management element comes without necessarily the ownership element. It may be just Black people being appointed to decision-making structures in the organization. However, where it relates to ownership, it means basically that where a person owns a particular stake, the management control must be commensurate with that particular stake. So that is why I indicated that initially that ownership directly links to management control, but management control can also exist on its own. And then in terms of the skills development, it is a requirement for measured entities to contribute towards developing the skills of South Africans, both in their own entities, but as well as external. This is particularly important to ensure that Black people are empowered and allowed to be in a position to acquire the skills that are necessary. So they are required to spend 6% of their payroll towards that. And you'll know that recently there were amendments that enabled the splitting of the 6%, with 3.5% being on training, as well as 2.5% directed at bursaries and such similar schemes within the universities and higher learning institutions. That also include the addition of the inclusion of the YES program, which a number of entities have also taken advantage of. It is important that we also then reflect on the enterprise and supply development. I already alluded to the fact that when you look at the South African economy, the majority of the Black entrepreneurs are still outside the economy. So this is intended to allow for that. And I'm also very glad that I'm talking to the Australian chamber, because this is not novel. I think also in Australia, the issue around indigenization and indigenous economic empowerment is also a critical issue. So in this case, we've seen that preferential procurement is important, where we are required to enable that Black people are able to access the economic opportunities in the country, but also that it is important to develop the supply chain by ensuring that you bring in new entrants in terms of the supply chain, as well as ensuring that you also develop the existing supplier to improve in terms of their supply, to make sure that their position is competitive and very beneficial to them. So now if you look at that, those are the 4 critical elements that a lot of entities are battling to achieve. So it is important that where you're struggling, you approach us as a B-BBEE Commission so that we can assist you. And the last element with the socio-economic development, it is an element, as I said, that is more open, more general, but then it is about income generating activities. So a number of entities do score the full points on that. And it is important that we note that it is about income generating. It's not about donations. So we must at all times ensure that we implement the appropriate measures. So having said that, how are we doing as a country in terms of B-BBEE? We're not doing very well. And the reason why we're saying we're not doing well is that because in terms of ownership, we're not meeting the targets that are set, which is 25% as a minimum. And we've seen that with the recent figures of our report, we are moving at around 31%, which is still very, very low compared to where we are coming from as a country. Most of the sectors are not meeting the minimum codes, but on average, we are somewhere around 31%. But also what is important as well, and what is of concern though, is that the majority of the entities are not meeting the priority elements. And that means, therefore, we are not able to make the impact that we need to make as a country. So I would like to appeal to all of the entities, all of the officials that advise those entities to feel free to engage government at all times, because B-BBEE is a policy that requires coordination amongst all of the role players for it to be effective. It is an inclusive economic policy, and therefore no single person can really do on their own to make the impact. So we need to coordinate, and we do have free advice, as I've indicated. But I think also what is important to mention in this particular forum is that B-BBEE gives an opportunity for cooperation between the Australian companies and the South African-based companies. But it also presents an opportunity for partnerships such as joint ventures to be implemented, as well as to an opportunity to align to the policies and the initiatives that are a priority to South Africa, such as the district development model, where specific selected districts in the country are being developed. So skills development initiatives and other investment programs could be directed to support government to develop those districts. In conclusion, I would like to thank you all for the presentation, and I will be available to take any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for that excellent overview historically, and you concluded at just the right note in terms of how are we doing, and with some great suggestions for South African companies around JVs and district development and inputs. May I now call on our next speaker, who comes from the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, Mr. Yunus Hoosen, who is in charge of inward investment attraction, because that's the next pillar in the webinar today, FDI and investment. Mr. Hoosen, how are we doing? Over to you.
Thank you, moderator and Judy. Kwedi. Greetings to everybody, and special thanks to Geet Amnat and my fellow panelists, the Commissioner of the BEE Commission, and the members of the Australian Business Chamber, and as well as Australia-Africa Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to speak to you about investment in South Africa. I will not be doing a presentation, but talking to some of the matters and opportunities, as I think the best part of the discussion would be on the Black Economic Empowerment Policy that was articulated by the Commissioner just before me. What I'd like to say is that InvestSA is a government agency that is focuses on the entire life cycle of investment to attract domestic and foreign investment, to facilitate it, and to provide an aftercare service, from investment promotion, facilitation, and aftercare. What we do is that we intergovernmentally coordinate with all levels of state, the three-tier system of government, to make it as seamless as possible for investors when they are looking at an opportunity, when they develop a project, to provide them specialist advisory on the policy framework, as the Commissioner articulated, and then on the regulatory aspects, navigate the administrative areas of government, and to meet a number of stakeholders so that the investment is quite seamless, and to provide a post-investment service. So as InvestSA, in this regard, for example, as the Commissioner has said, the key to understanding broad-based Black economic empowerment is to hear it from the horse's mouth. And what we do is that within our one-stop shop approach, we have a one-stop shop where we have a colleague that is a BEE facilitator. So if you contact a BEE facilitator within InvestSA, they will happily arrange the meeting for you with the department that is doing our special SEZ and transformation. That's where the BEE resides, and to assist you on the entire spectrum of the codes, as well as the equity equivalent program, so that you can understand that the program itself is of economic benefit, and you are able to extract economic value. What we do typically is that we lead and head the President's investment mobilization drive. The President has an investment mobilization drive of 1.2 trillion rand, or $100 billion. And we host a number of conferences and marketing outreaches to attract investment in this regard. We're now in our 4th year. Last year, we did a hybrid conference in which we were able to achieve about 64% of this target. The second thing that we do on behalf of the presidency, we have a dedicated focus on the ease of doing business program, and that is to make South Africa's administrative barrier impediments easier, to make it much more easier to navigate the landscape, and that's a significant portion of what we've been doing. And you would understand that, for example, the World Bank Investment Climate Reform Report will come out next week. And I do know that for the first time, South Africa has made 4 reforms since the inception of the report with the World Bank. So it's a dedicated effort within the 6th administration that we have in South Africa. So from a South African perspective, I think what I would like to also say that you have a very active High Commission and High Commissioner in South Africa, as well as you have a very active chair, Judy, in the chamber. So there is no reason for us not to accelerate this relationship. And the relationship between South Africa and Australia is two-way. We had a very good meeting last week with your Minister of Trade to look at issues of trade. So both trade and investment, it's a two-way relationship between Australia and South Africa. And I think key for us post-COVID is a partnership that we have worked with the private sector in terms of developing South Africa's economic reconstruction and recovery program, which essentially focuses on 4 elements: to create jobs, reindustrialize the economy, focusing on growth, and particularly in small businesses, and accelerating the economic reforms. Some of them I've mentioned. Infrastructure is a key enabler for us, and found becomes the backbone of flywheel, as the president calls it. South Africa is very keen and now is moving fast on energy security as well as energy transition. And you can see that we've already moved on the risk mitigation independent power producers program. 8 bidders were awarded those particular programs, as well as the release of round 5 of the energy program. So that, as well as new areas for investment in areas of digital healthcare, in areas of innovation, in areas of, for example, we spoke the other day with the High Commissioner in areas of hydrogen, expanding the areas of the services economy, clean tech, electric mobility, agro-processing, and as a number of other areas in infrastructure itself. I think that mining and the mining value chain would be a significant opportunity for South Africa, as we're looking at other areas of using the raw materials such as the platinum in terms of beneficiation, in terms of the electric mobility program, as well as fuel cell. And this also brings about some new opportunities, particularly in the light of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which went live in January. This brings about significant, sizable markets, particularly for infrastructure development, for integration, as well as trade and investment. And I think that from Australia's perspective, when you're looking at the African continent, you need to look at where would you locate your regional manufacturing or services hub. And South Africa offers you a distinct advantage of being the most industrialized economy on the continent, highly diversified economic infrastructure, as well as sectoral composition, endowed with natural resources abundantly, a modern infrastructure, sophisticated banking with a major footprint in Africa, and as well as undergoing infrastructure rollout. Government support and ecosystem for the hub for innovation, technology, and fintech, as well as now South Africa becoming a regional hub for manufacturing of vaccines and healthcare itself. And the partnership, as I said earlier on, with the private sector. So this is what we do. We are in the DTIC, it's the family that we come from, Department of Trade, Industry, and Competition. We develop sectoral plans in terms of our industrial policy, which we call master plans, and we have a number of master plans. So we are able to advise you what are these opportunities in these master plans, how we're doing localization and local content, are we doing public procurement, are we doing designation. So we're able to offer you this expert advice to look at these opportunities, to work as an Australian company, to partner South African companies in joint ventures, to look at issues of supplier development, to look at issues of enterprise development, and as well as to look at issues of skills development. So InvestSA provides you or unlocks for you or facilitates for you these kind of arrangements, as well as we are able to fast track for you visas, environmental impact assessments. Today we have digitized the company registration process, which you can do it within a day on the BIS portal. And I'd like also that we have, for InvestSA, we have revamped our website called investsa.org.za, and that focuses on two areas where an investor that has not invested and is looking at South Africa, what do you need and what kind of information we can provide you. And the second part focuses on existing investors. How can you grow your investment? What are the other areas or support levels you would have? So it's a totally revamped website on investment promotion, as well as I would love that we are launching a new website on the ease of doing business, which is called www.doingbusiness.org.za, a very comprehensive site that focuses on starting a business, the entire value chain of how you start a business, what you would do in terms of compliance, reporting, and so forth, how you would get, how would you close a business, how business rescue, the entire gambit of starting a business. So it's a very comprehensive site, and it's quite targeted towards SMMEs, youth, and women-owned businesses. So these are some of the tools that we are revamping in South Africa to create a much more enabling environment, to make it much more easier for companies to work in South Africa, as well as work on the continent. And then lastly, I say within those master plans, I see there is a question in the chat. We're happy to provide you those master plans that we have done, but also other opportunities in terms of like medical devices, big data, digital telemedicine, and areas of healthcare that we could look at into complementarities with Australia, as well as opportunities where we can work jointly on investment, as well as encourage trade between our countries and work together on the African continent. So South Africa is a small country itself in terms of the global trade and investment, has one of the finest market access regimes globally. And this market access regimes therefore becomes an excellent value proposition for you to establish a manufacturing or regional hub to reach these markets in the EU, the UK, for example, or the Americas, as well as South America through the Mercosur arrangement that we have. But significantly, our work in terms of both trade and investment is the opening up of the markets in terms of supporting infrastructure development, integration and trade on the African continent. So with those few short remarks, I would like to say that we offer a one-stop shop approach on investment, and that is basically a hand-holding process throughout the different levels of government and departments, as well as agencies, or what we call state-owned entities that report to government. So with those few words, I'd like to stop here and happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hoosen, and thank you to Ms. Ntuli. The floor is now open for questions. There have been a few posed on the chat group that I think you've already noticed. However, we have our sister body or brother body in Melbourne, Australia, and it is represented today by Mr. Duncan Harris from the Australia-Africa Chamber of Commerce. Duncan, you had a question or two or a comment, if you'd like to share that with both the Commissioner and the head, please.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Judy. Can you hear me? Is that okay?
We hear you very, very well. Thank you.
Okay. Two things. Firstly, I really did appreciate, particularly the BEE presentation. For those of us who understand at the end of the day, it's all about contracting in law for business. We need to understand the rules of the day that apply in every jurisdiction. And this was particularly helpful, and I'm very grateful that it's being recorded. I've already had some of my members asking, can we get a copy of the recording in time for that? Secondly, in relation to the South African investment, we just recently, and I was very impressed about the reference to the Continental Africa Free Trade Agreement, because we actually hosted the Secretary General for the Secretariat 2 weeks ago with DFAT, Austrade, and some of our other partners, to have a proper understanding what the economic connections can be. And by the way, he happens to be a very proud South African, Mr. Mene, M-E-N-E. He's a very, very able and impressive gentleman. So I listened very carefully. South Africa business is very much on the number, and I look forward to the new website being available so we can actually also make that a useful tool for Australian companies looking to invest in it. Above all else, I want to say, just by way of an observation, I thank you for allowing us to participate in this today. I think you've got an excellent platform on what you're doing.
Thank you very, very much. So that was more an observation and a commitment in terms of ensuring that there is no misunderstanding and that there is the limiting of the misinformation that is often in the marketplace that detracts and distracts from the imperatives of BEE. Our next question is going to come from Regina Molly, and it really is to you, Mr. Hoosen, because you raised the issue of minerals, hydrogen, etc. Regina, could you ask your question, please?
Sure. Thank you, Yunus, for your time today. As an Australian residing in South Africa with a mining background, we have a particular interest in hydrogen. South Africa is very advanced in hydrogen and are global leaders in PGEs. What opportunities do you think we could leverage between Australia and South Africa in the intellectual knowledge that South Africa has around hydrogen energy?
Thank you very much. And I think that it's a question that we also discussed early on when I met High Commissioner Kamnat. It's a great possibility, given that both economies are by and large mineral economies, and the opportunity for us to look from a scientific research and development perspective, how we can work together to see the total value chain and which value chain that we can complement and work together with in South Africa. As you know, in South Africa, we have InvestSA that reports to the Department of Science and Innovation that has done our roadmap on hydrogen. And from our perspective in the DTIC, because there are different government departments, it also would cut across the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. On our side, we will look at the industrialization part of it. And I think that for South Africa's perspective, this would be, I think, the biggest sector that if we do it right, we can really excel. There's no reason why South Africa cannot be the largest exporter of green hydrogen globally. So that is how big the sector could be for us. But it remains in what product segment of value chain and partnership. For example, we had this brief discussion with the High Commissioner, but we talked to, for example, Germany, we talked to UK, we talked to Japan. So in the value chain, and I know I'm very, very bullish about the electric mobility side, on the electric batteries and so forth. But there's a total value chain in which South Africa is both capable in the green hydrogen side as well as blue hydrogen. So that is how big the sector is, and Australia could be a good partner for South Africa because of the commodity, the raw material that we both have competencies on. So I think it is an area that maybe we should actually, I'm just throwing this aloud, that it should be explored on a G2G level.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Ntuli, I have a question that is not on the chat site. It was sent through to us, and it relates to a reflection on the codes. And the question is as follows. Some sectors identified in the early 2000s were considered essential sites for economic transformation, yet they are not conducive to sustained economic transformation. And conversely, new areas like renewables, digital technology, data analytics, and platform economies, where Australia is particularly strong, may require greater scrutiny in order to unlock opportunities for empowerment. What are the possibilities that policy may be reconfigured in order to accommodate the changes with greenfields and new areas in business? Thank you, Commissioner.
All right, no, thank you very much for the question. I think it is important that we acknowledge that various sectors might change from time to time. But as I indicated earlier, that the B-BBEE legislation is flexible in a sense that if there's a new sector or there are new developments in the sector, a specific sector code can either be developed, and in instances where there is an existing sector code, it can be amended to then take into account those new developments. So I do believe that there is an opportunity, obviously, for every jurisdiction to reflect on the implementation of its legislation, and where there are changes that are required, proposals can be made. But I think what has been explained now is something that can be either a new specific sector code or the adjustment to the existing sector code can be done. So that is the flexibility that is embedded in the framework. And I do think that with engagement between us and the entities, then we can come up with a solution.
Great, thank you so much. Mr. Hoosen, one directly to you. You may have seen it on the chat group. Red tape, red tape, red tape. I'm a 37-year-old woman struggling to get much needed assistance and guidance with tire recycling. Currently, there's a tire crisis in South Africa. I see the gap, but red tape. This is sort of not an Australia to South Africa in terms of the essence of the webinar, but you comment on it, because whilst you say InvestSA is a one-stop shop, is it seamless? Is it effortless when you want to come into South Africa or when you're in South Africa? What has been your experience with regard to that 360-degree service that you offer? How seamless is it?
Thanks. Look, we are aware of the problem and the challenges within the tire recycling industry. And that is why I think what InvestSA is an advocacy unit within government for the private sector. It provides a listening ear to the private sector. I'd be happy if you contact me. I've given you my details and Raghavan's details. If you contact us and see what is it that we can do for you on this particular problem or issue that you say you have with the tire recycling unit. That is our job, is to unblock these kind of challenges when they arise and see if there are issues on the government side. Then it's something that we can see how we can unlock that and unblock that.
Great. I wonder if I could put Mr. Scott Morris on the spot for a moment as the new arrival into South Africa. I wonder if you could share with us your perceptions prior to arrival in terms of these instruments and policies. And now that you're here and you've listened to the Commissioner and the head of DTIC, what is it that when you were on your way to South Africa was top of your mind around facilitating increased FDI into South Africa. It's so, Mr. Morris, sorry to do this to you.
No problem. A pleasure, and thank you very much for the presentations, Commissioner and Mr. Hoosen as well. I found them very informative. Look, I guess fundamentally, my role being the opposite of DTIC is to encourage investment into Australia, but taking account of the South Africa's desire to increase investment from Australia into Africa, I think the win-win solution is really foremost in my mind. Being I must say, being at the outset, still a novice in the Africa trade relationship with Australia. I think what's sprung to my mind mostly, obviously, with our large engagement in the mining and METS community in Africa, skills development. That struck me quite considerably. In other words, investing in skills development. I think there's a lot of ground that hasn't been covered so far yet in terms of co-investment or innovative co-investment between our miners, METS companies, and potentially some educational institutions to uncover opportunity there and assist with South Africa's agenda. I'm aware that we have natural assets, perhaps more so than many other countries in Africa, in that we've got a very large immigrant population from South Africa in Australia. So I see the future as very positive, but I think I've heard some really good key messages from the South African government on this particular webinar about digitisation. Forward thinking in terms of better explaining the regulations and laws. And I can say that, having spoken to a number of companies before I left Australia, mainly in Perth, that is one of the key issues that they have, is gaining and grasping a better understanding of the legal environment, and particularly when it comes to B-BBEE and how it applies to their ongoing investments is critical for them. So these kinds of initiatives are really welcome and beyond being a great learning opportunity for me. I'm not sure that answers your question, but
no, I also think it is important that all partners on the call today know who our go-to people are in Pretoria. So, Mr. Hoosen, there was a question directly for you. I noted you said that there's opportunities for foreign investors to invest in South Africa. I'm not clear on whether they invest into South Africa directly, or do they or they look specifically at companies to invest in. If so, please enlighten us on how to seize these opportunities. I hope the question's clear. I've taken it directly from the chat group.
Thank you very much, Judy, for that question, and the person that posed the question. South Africa is an open economy, so the thing is, you can invest directly as a company in South Africa, and many people do that. Or it has a very robust competition commission and competition act, where you can do a merger and acquisition. You can invest in companies. You can buy out companies, and as I said, it works. It's a very open economy that you can invest directly, or you can do a joint venture. You can buy out a company, or you can invest in companies. So, and depending on an opportunity, on a business case, it's up to you how you would want to enter the market. If you look at our website, as I said, InvestSA.org.za, you'll get an idea of some of the sectors that you can, or opportunities that you can invest in. We have a number of DFIs also, and as well as a number of institutions, like Judy is the Secretary General of the Black Business Council, that can provide companies to you that you may want to joint venture in terms of your investment plan in South Africa. So it's a very open economy. We're happy to sit down with a company and advise them throughout this journey of investment into South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. We are unfortunately drawing to a close, and we respect the time of every participant and every speaker. So I will ask Eugene Olim, also from Pretoria, to pose the last question and to answer the question that was posed in the chat group. Over to you. He's the first secretary at the Australian High Commission. And I keep wanting to say Canberra, where I've spent maybe too many years, everybody. And I have to remind myself that everyone is in Pretoria. Over to you, Eugene.
Thank you, Judy, and hello to everyone. I've got a question which is a slight, it's not exactly the remit of either the Commissioner or Mr. Hoosen, but we'd be very interested in your views or any perspective that you might be able to throw onto this issue, which is to do with discussions in Parliament on land expropriation, where it is an issue which it bears on the Black economic empowerment agenda, and it also does affect the investment environment. I'd be very interested in just to get your initial views on where do you think this is going in South Africa, and what should foreign business here be preparing themselves for? Thank you.
Excellent question, Mr. Olim. So, Ms. Ntuli, you have expansive insights. So, if you could have a go at the question first, please, without compromising your position.
No, thank you very much. Fortunately, I am not wearing a personal cap, so I can only give you an institutional response to that. But I would like to say that South Africa, as Mr. Hoosen has indicated, is a very open environment for business. But I think what is more important about it is that we ensure certainty in terms of the regulatory framework, in terms of the policies, in terms of what entities are expected to adhere to. So in terms of the land reform process, there are specific policies that are implemented in South Africa. Anyway, starting from our constitution that does, that set out the parameters in terms of the extent to which various mechanisms can be implemented in South Africa, with the rights of various individuals entrenched in the constitution. And flowing from that, you know that the Department of Land and Rural Development has always been engaged with this particular process, setting out policies in terms of facilitating the transfer of ownership, the support mechanisms and funding towards the various land reform processes. And recently, you'll note that Parliament is seized with that process, where there is a specific committee in Parliament that is handling that. So all of these processes are transparent processes that as soon as government has finalized the processes in Parliament relating to issues of land and expropriation of land, that will be known to everybody else. And as we said, I think the whole purpose of ensuring transparency is to give confidence and certainty to our investors. So I think I will end it at that, but to also just indicate that the issue of land is obviously a very difficult question in South Africa, and it does tend to be emotional. And that is why our government has taken a very transparent step in dealing with it, which is a process that is inclusive, that includes almost everyone that would be affected by it. And you would have noticed that the committee has also gone through various rural areas to hear the views of people on the ground as well, so that whatever outcome is adopted would be an outcome that will be beneficial to the country, but also be sensitive to all of the other trading partners that we are involved with. I will stop it at that.
Thank you. Yunus, you have the last word as we move to closure. Thank you. You are about to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I think in South Africa, equally so, we have a very robust system, and there's a very there's a parliamentary process which has a number of parliamentary hearings, and this is where the process is. We have made substantial progress on this particular issue. It's now the Land Reform Commission has done its report. It's now going through the parliamentary process, and from the feedback that we are seeing from many investors out there, it seems to be very positive. So I think from us, what we would like to say, let us complete the parliamentary process, and we'll have, as Zodwa says, our task is to provide the certainty on the policy and regulations thereof. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think that question and the ending of this webinar provides us with an imperative as the Australian Chamber to, once the process is concluded, is to host a webinar to ensure that communication and clear communication takes place, so that, again, the derailing of issues around transformation and the land being key to that is not hijacked. So thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to the Deputy Chair of ABSCA, Regina Molly, to conclude and close. Over to you, Regina.
Thank you, Judy. On behalf of the Australian Business Chamber Southern Africa, we thank you, Commissioner Zodwa Ntuli, for sharing your empowerment vision and strategy with us today. We are with you and wanting to see South Africa reach equality in the future. So we appreciate your time and your commitment. Also, a warm thank you to you, Mr. Yunus Hoosen, for sharing your South African investment knowledge. We know that your insights were valuable to the members listening today, but also those that will watch our recording in the future. So thank you very much for your time. For the other members that are listening today, the Australian Business Chamber's purpose is to facilitate, to support trade and commerce relationships between Australia and South Africa, as well as the SADC. The Chamber's vision is supporting opportunities for trade via networking events and information dispersion to our members, and working collaboratively with the Australian and South African government and trade representatives. The Chamber's mission is to enable successful and sustainable trade and commerce relationships from Australia into South Africa and the SADC. So in future, if there are opportunities for the Chamber to support South Africa's missions, Commissioner Zodwa and Mr. Hoosen, please don't hesitate to contact and reach out to us. Our door is open to work with South Africa. Further, I'd like to thank the support of the Australian High Commission, including Eugene Olim and Commissioner Ms. Geeta Kamar, for assisting to organise this webinar today. Also, a special mention to Mark Cocker and his team from the Boiler Room for assisting with drafting, and Fabian Rousseau, our administrator, for her excellent organisation of this webinar. We thank everyone for your attendance today. We look forward to many future webinars together in advancing Australia and South Africa's trade and commerce relationship. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon, and we'll be communicating with you. Have a wonderful evening and a good day to all. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.